Hi, Joe Smiles here. Today we're going to look at should you train to failure? Don't listen to Mike Israetel. So the question is, do we train to volitional failure, which is where you train, if you did one more rep, you wouldn't be able to complete the concentric and eccentric part of the movement? Or would you train to absolute failure, which is where you fail your last rep and you can't complete the concentric part? Or do you train many reps away from failure, which is, say, 5 reps away from failure? And the question is, which of those do you do in order to optimize maximal strength and hypertrophy? Let's look at what Mike Israetel has to say about this subject.
My last prep, I doubted myself a little bit, which is fundamentally not terrible. And thought maybe I wasn't training hard enough, which, people have said to me that I don't train so hard. And they're not wrong. They're not wrong. I do leave some reps in the tank. And I was like, you know what? Let me rise up to the occasion. And I started training harder, getting closer to failure consistently. And it just made me really, really fatigued. Did not add any more muscle than normal. It just was not worth it. And ever since then, more or less this whole past year or half year, including now, I've been stopping short of failure, 2-3 reps in the tank. In my last week of the meso, I stopped, honestly, 1 to 2 reps in the tank. And I'm having basically some of the best training in my entire life. Consistently, week after week after week, I'm getting stronger, I'm recovering, and my muscle size is kind of absurdly the biggest it's ever been. So, yeah. Hard training's cool. If you've never done it before, you got to do it to figure out where your limits are. I mean, probably in almost all of high school and definitely all of college, I trained every single set to failure, multiple set program. So that was dope. I got hurt more. I didn't understand what cumulative fatigue was. And after 3 weeks of training, I'd always get hit like a ton of bricks. And I was like, the fuck's going on? My training partners are experiencing the same thing. And so I know how training to failure feels.
He basically has no idea how to train. And this is very common with people who do drugs because their body, their testosterone levels is so high that they increase their strength faster than their mind or their body can get accustomed or adapt to what their limitations are. So they never know what they need to train up to or what their level is, because every week they're improving, which is, you can't do that with drug-free people. The other thing is you need to train to volitional failure, which is 0 reps in reserve. Reason being is because you need 3 things, 3 principles: mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and progressive overload. You can only get progressively overloading your muscles, especially for drug-free people, when you train up to volitional failure, because that's where you then make the adaptations to increase your reps on the next set or the next week or the next couple of weeks drug-free. Okay, not all exercises should be taken to volitional failure, or definitely not to absolute failure. I'll go through some exercises and show you which exercises you can do to volitional failure, which is no reps in reserve, and what exercises you can do 1 or 2 reps in reserve with. Okay, everyone wants a quick fix. That's why so many people are doing drugs. But when you're not doing drugs, you have to train to volitional failure. An example of that would be a chin-up, so curl grip chin-up. So with this, it's perfectly safe to go to volitional failure where you can't do another rep on your own. So let me give you an example. Okay, I've already trained chin-ups tonight, but that's an example of I did 12 reps with 20. I couldn't have done another complete rep, so I stopped at 0 reps in reserve. Okay, I haven't got a barbell, but I'm going to give you an example of when you do barbell bench pressing, you want to train with 1 rep in reserve for safety. Unless you've got a spotter, you can go to 0 reps in reserve. But sometimes it's best to go 1 rep in reserve for barbell benching. And I'll just demonstrate with dumbbells. So it'd be like this. Going like this. So imagine I got to 20 reps and then I slowed right down. I take a rest and do another rep, but that's as far as you go with barbell bench pressing. With dumbbells, you can go to 0 reps in reserve because you can just come down, put them on the knees and sit up. Okay, with the deadlift, you want to keep your back in lordotic position like this, as flat as you can. And you want to have 1 reps in reserve for deadlifts because you want safety. Because as soon as you feel your abs caving in like this, or your back starts doing this, you've gone too far. You want to take the rep back, 1 rep from that place, so 1 rep out from that reserve. And you also, when you deadlift, if you come around the side, James, you want to avoid this. Which is where I'm tucking my pelvis under when I'm trying to extend the hips. This is where it stretches the musculature of your lower back, which increases your chances of injury, like the ligaments that run up the spinous processes of your spine, the supraspinous ligaments and the spinal erectors and the facet joint. You can overstretch them by having the muscles overloaded and fatigued, and then going into flexion like this whilst doing hip extension. So the pelvis goes into flexion, into posterior tilt, but you're extending the hips at the same time. So you want to stay 1 or 2 reps in reserve for that. Okay, let's look at 2 studies to back up what I'm saying. So study 1, 2024. So they looked at comparing volitional failure to a few reps in reserve, and they found that with the rectus femoris, which is the longest muscle in the quad, the one that goes, this one here, see, the middle muscle that crosses the hip and knee, they found that with a few reps in reserve, that increased the most, and with the vastus lateralis muscle, they found that increased the most size with going to failure. Also, they also found that going to volitional failure caused more neuromuscular fatigue. However, over time, they found that the body adapts to that neuromuscular fatigue, and then you adapt to going towards volitional failure as opposed to going to 2 reps in reserve, so that you actually adapt to the stress. Again, it's the metabolic stress and the mechanical tension of going up to volitional failure, which is 0 reps in reserve or 1 rep in reserve. And if we look at study number 2, which is 2022, the effects of resistance training performing repetition failure or non-failure on muscle strength and hypertrophy, it was a systematic review and meta-analysis. And they found, looking at 15 studies on strength and hypertrophy, they actually found that training 1 or 2 reps in reserve for strength was better for strength gains, but training to volitional failure, no reps in reserve, was better for hypertrophy gains. So you can do a bit of both. Then I just want to back up the exercise physiology behind what I'm talking about going into volitional failure. The Henneman's principle is that you have an orderly fashion of innervating various muscle fibers. So to begin with, when you're doing a set, say I'm curling, at first I'm using low threshold motor units, and I'm using slow twitch type 1 muscle fibers. As the mechanical tension increases, or the load, the force, and also the muscle fatigue increases, I then transition to using more motor units to recruit the higher threshold fibers, which are the type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. So then I'm using more, so that as I get more fatigued and I'm putting more force and stress through the muscle, I'm then using more motor units to recruit more muscle fibers. And that is how you optimize strength gains and hypertrophy. So it's a orderly fashion of recruiting more and more muscle fibers by being innovated by recruiting more and more motor units.